Godwin the Golden is one of the most likely demigods to be Marika and Godfrey's firstborn. Godwin was widely known as a kind and powerful demigod, the only healthy son of Queen Marika who wasn't afflicted with any curses. During the War of Ancient Dragons, Godwin managed to defeat dreaded Fortisax, an act which won the friendship of his foe and put a stop to the war. However, instead of destroying his enemies, Godwin made peace with them and established the first Church of Dragon Communion in Leyndell. After a while, Lunar Princess Ronnie, a stepsister of Godwin, stole a fracture of Rune of Death. She then made weapons known as Black Knives with it, and had Godwin slain with them, an event which became known as the Night of the Black Knives. However, Godwin only died in soul and not in the body, so after his death, his body, still afflicted with Rune of Death, started growing into Erdtree's roots, which turned him into a grotesque figure, known as Prince of Death. His new form also gave birth to Deathroot, which gave rise to creatures known as those who live in death. Much like Godwin himself, those who live in death could only live through their bodies and not their souls. Morgot, otherwise known as the Omen King, was a son of Marika and Godfrey. Because of his hornsent appearance, which in the Golden Order is known as the Omen Curse, Marika banished him and his twin brother to the subterranean shunning grounds. Despite Golden Order's hatred against the Omens, Morgot renounced his accursed blood and claimed himself as the defender of the Erdtree. During the Shattering, Morgot claimed the Great Rune of the Elden Ring and successfully defended Leyndell against other demigods, such as Godric, Reichard, and even the Star-Scourge Radon. He was also known as the leader of the Knights Cavalry, a group of knights tasked with hunting down the Tarnished who tried to claim the Great Runes. Twin brother to Morgot, Moog was also banished to the subterranean shunning grounds. But unlike Morgot, instead of renouncing his accursed blood, he embraced it. During his confinement, he managed to contact an outer god known as the Formless Mother, an entity which allowed Moog to use blood magic, also making him to be known as the Lord of Blood. During the Shattering, Moog kidnapped Michela the Kind, another demigod who had the potential of replacing Marika due to being an Empyrean. But because of being cursed with eternal childhood, he could never realize his true potential. Moog tried to nourish Michela's flesh with blood in order to raise him to true godhood, and become his king consort himself. However, Michela would never respond. It is suggested that due to Moog's contact with Formless Mother, Michela manages to access the Land of the Shadows, which was veiled by Queen Marika herself. After his death by the hand of the Tarnished character, Michela uses Moog's body as a vessel to resurrect Radon. Godric the Grafted is an offspring of Godfrey and lord of a Stormvale castle. Known as the most cowardly of the demigods, Godric was defeated at Leyndell and had to escape the city among the womenfolk. He then hides from Radon in the Stormvale castle, and when he is met with Malenia, he insults her, which he very much regrets later as he has to beg for mercy. Godric practiced grafting, the act of attaching limbs of other creatures to oneself in order to gather their strength. He was very much inspired by his forefather Godfrey, and despite not having any of his strength or honor, he wished to one day earn his respect. Radon was a son of Queen Ranola and King Consort Radagon. He is likely to be the firstborn of this couple. Since early childhood, Radon showed great potential for becoming a great warrior and a kind ruler of the Golden Order, qualities which didn't remain unnoticed by Michela the Kind, who wished Radon to become his consort once he was raised to godhood. Radon was also inspired by the first Elden Lord, Godfrey, who was known as the Lord of the Battlefield. Radon was raised to learn the ways of battle, as well as sorcery in the town of Celia, making him the mightiest demigod of the Shattering. Eventually he crushed the stars themselves and halted their movement, an event which made him to be known as the Star-Scourge. It is likely that he later refused to betray the Golden Order and become Michela's consort, an act which triggered Michela to send his sister, Melenia, to meet Radon in combat. However, when the demigods clashed, their battle ended in a stalemate. Malenia eventually unleashed the Scarlet Rot as a final attempt to kill Radon. However, Radon set himself on fire in order to not be consumed by the rot. Instead, he lost his wits and became a roaming beast in the old battlefields of Aeonia. A group of his followers eventually defeated him, which turns out to be more in Michela's favor than in Radon's, since now Michela could finally resurrect Radon as his consort in the Land of Shadows. Reichard was also a son of Rennala and Radon. He was one of the only demigods who declared an all-out war against the Golden Order itself, which made him to be known as the Lord of Blasphemy. His forces clashed with Morgot's army several times, which became known as one of the most gruesome battles during the Shattering. Eventually, Reichard fed himself to the ancient blasphemous serpent that resided underneath the volcano manor, an act which made even his own knights and soldiers realize that the ambitions of their lord has succumbed to mere greed. Reichard's body fused with that of the serpent, turning them both into one entity, which also seemingly granted him immortality. Now, his only wish is to devour the gods until he could devour the world itself. Ronnie was the youngest of Radon and Rennala's children. She was an Empyrean, which meant she had the potential to be chosen as the next god of the Golden Order by the Two Fingers. She had a secret mentor who is only known as the Snowy Crone, who practiced heretical magic. She would eventually become Ronnie's mentor and teach her the forbidden sorceries. In the Night of the Black Knives, Ronnie armed 9 assassins with daggers, imbued with Rune of Death itself, and tasked them with assassinating Godwin the Golden. While the assassins were carrying out this task, Ronnie also stabbed herself with one of these daggers, which caused her to die in body while her soul is still alive. Ronnie carried this whole plan out because she wanted to escape her fate as an Empyrean of the Golden Order. Her soul was eventually transferred to a doll that is modeled after her mentor. Mezmer is also another demigod who could potentially be Marika's firstborn. It's not clear when he was born or who his father is, but judging from his red hair, we can assume he was a child of Radon. Like all children of Marika, Mezmer was born cursed by an entity known as the Abyssal Serpent, which allowed him to use the most powerful element in the lore known as the Mezmer's Flame. But in return, he was distrusted by everyone as an enemy of the Erdtree, since serpents are a symbol of the traitors to the Golden Order. It is said that Mezmer also has a sister, which is theorized to be the Glomite Queen. Before the Shattering, Mezmer was tasked by his mother to purge the tower-dwelling people known as the Hornsent. However, after carrying his task, Marika abandoned him without contacting him ever again, or allowing him and his soldiers to return to the lands between. Michela the Unalloyed is a son of Queen Marika and King Consort Radon. He is also twin brother to Malenia. Like Ronnie and his twin sister, Michela is also an Empyrean, but because he was cursed with eternal childhood, he could never realize his true potential as a god of Golden Order. So he worked and experimented tirelessly to find a way of curing his affliction. Michela also has an alter ego known as Saint Trina, who is highly associated with his sleep and dreams. Over time, Michela becomes obsessed with having his half-brother, Radon, as his consort, which Radon eventually refuses. Later on, Michela creates his own Erdtree, a place of safety for all those who are considered as impure by Golden Order. Michela orders Melenia to slay Radon so later on he could resurrect him and finally have him as his consort. Around the same time, he gets kidnapped by Moog, and through his connection with Formless Mother, he manages to enter the Land of Shadow. There, Michela divests himself of his flesh and also his alter ego, so that he would only live in a spirit, only to attain godhood and finally resurrect Radon as his promised consort. Malenia is the youngest demigod of the game. Like her twin brother, Malenia is also born afflicted by a curse of the Scarlet Rot, which is directly related to an outer god simply known as the Rot. Malenia's curse causes her body to decay over time, and by the time the tarnished character meets her, she has only one of her limbs left. At a young age, Malenia meets a blind swordsman who teaches her how to use a sword as well as how to resist the call of the Scarlet Rot. She eventually becomes one of the strongest demigods in the lore, but despite this, she dedicates herself entirely to Michela, taking the role of his blade and the commander of his armies. Eventually, Michela commands Malenia to defeat Radon, which results in the most catastrophic battle of the Shattering. Despite being a proud warrior, Malenia was left with no choice but to give in to the Scarlet Rot and unleash it upon Caelid Wells as a final attempt to slay Radon. Radon survives the battle, but is highly affected by the rot, while Malenia was carried back by one of her greatest knights to the Erdtree, where she eternally waits the return of her brother.